Matt. We're going to continue on here. I'm going to do a lesson on our series that we're in here, and I'm going to try to keep it short, although I'm not very good at that, but we will have some discussion questions to continue to process and talk about what we're learning here during our potluck. So looking forward to that together. We're going to continue talking about thriving relationships. So we talked about having a thriving relationship with God. We're going to talk about having thriving relationships with each other. If you remember last time, we talked about this idea of discipling, and we defined it as just basically helping one another become more like Jesus. On a very basic level, we're trying to just become more like Christ. That's really our aim here. And this idea that we need to walk closely with one another so that we can ourselves walk closely with God. And I know I wouldn't be here standing before you if not for the people in my life who have really helped me to get close to God, to get back to God when I've wandered away, right? And I think we need one another to thrive in our faith. And so today what I want to do is look at how did Jesus do this? Because Jesus had 12 apostles, right? Like, what did he do to really help them become like him? Like, what did he do to help them catch his heart? Jesus had a very limited amount of time, right? He really only had 3 years of ministry. And in that short period of time, I think we look at what Jesus did and how he lived, we can learn how they caught his heart, and in the same way we can learn how to catch his heart as well. And so, what did Jesus do with the apostles? Jesus, really, he had 12, but even amongst the 12, he had like the 3. He had Peter, James, and John were kind of the inner circle, and you could argue Jesus, he could have focused on the crowds. He could have just, had 5 sermons on the mount and just stood out there with the bullhorn. But Jesus seemed to feel like, no, this focused individual approach was the way to go, to really help people kind of in this individual way. And he knew that would then spread and change the world. And so I think for us, one of the best ways we grow is just in that focused way, in these one another relationships. And so anyway, what did Jesus do? We're going to look at how Jesus really helped disciple, mentor, encourage, whatever term you want to use. He did it in 3 ways: through association, expectation, and demonstration. Number 1 is association. What do we mean by that? Basically, Jesus discipled his apostles by simply spending time with them. In Mark chapter 3, it says that Jesus went up on a mountainside and called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed 12, that they might be with him, and that he might send them out to preach, and to have authority to drive out demons. Basically, it's interesting that it says, what did he call them to do? Number 1 thing on the list, be with him. It's interesting. You almost wouldn't expect that to even be in the paragraph. It would make just as much sense that he called them and appointed them to go out to preach and drive out demons. But the very first clause is appointed them to be with him. That was like the number 1 part of them catching his heart, was simply being around him. Occasionally Jesus sent them out to be away from him, to be kind of on their own. We'll look at an example of that in a second, but the majority of what we see in the Gospels is Jesus right there with his apostles. And they were able to see all kinds of things just because they're with him. You think about later in Mark 8, he feeds the 4,000. And then afterwards they're in the boat and, talking about yeast. And they have this discussion, basically, how Jesus is encouraging them to ponder what they've learned from that experience, right? Just simply by being with him, there's a lot to be learned. In Mark 9, they see Jesus drive out this demon. If you remember, they come to him after, like, Jesus, why couldn't we drive out the demon? Because they tried, but they couldn't do it. Why couldn't we do it? And Jesus proceeds to show them how some of the greatest difficulties can only be conquered through prayer. In Mark 11, the apostles see Jesus wither a fig tree. He's just like on his way to Jerusalem. He's like, curses this fig tree and just withers. And in asking him about that and dialoguing, Jesus teaches them that their faith can not just wither trees, but move mountains. Over and over, the apostles are trained, mentored, discipled by simply being with Jesus, seeing his interactions, right? Seeing how did he treat people, his tenderness, seeing what exasperated him, what did he get frustrated by, and so on and so forth. Simply, we become like those we spend time around. Isn't that true? You ever notice that? You start using a phrase because your friend uses that phrase, and then you look back and you're like, who started saying this first, right? Like, you kind of adopt these things. When I moved to Colorado, when I was in New Hampshire, everyone said wicked. Like, it's wicked cold. In Boston, they're wicked smart, right? And It's just like a common word. It's wicked cold, wicked smart, wicked whatever. And after moving to Colorado, I was like, no one says this. I didn't like consciously think that, but I just noticed like, no one says this. And to this day, I don't say it anymore. It just has vanished from my vocabulary. And it's just funny. You kind of you adapt to the people you're around. Or I think about Samuel. Like he's learned a lot of words. A lot of his words aren't necessarily things we taught him, right? It's just things that he picks up, which is really cool and also kind of scary, right? Because you're like, he's gonna say whatever we're saying. So like it's kind of a check. Better watch my tongue, right? But I think we become like those we're around. And there's a lot to be learned by simply being with one, Jesus, but also being with one another. Mm-hmm. On a practical level, I think this means several things. One, there's no substitute for just being together. There's no substitute for time spent. And it doesn't always have to be a multi-hour commitment, right? Like sometimes we need time with each other, and it could just be a quick touch point. It could be, hey, come on over for dinner. You have to eat anyway, right? Why don't we do it together? I think we're all busy. We all have a lot going on. You don't have to be together all the time, but if you have a discipling partner where you go, we're going to be there for each other and really help each other, we should really strive to have like a felt presence in that person's life, right? Like people should feel like, if you're in a discipling relationship, people should feel like we're there for each other, that I'm available for you, that I care, right? And of course, I think this means getting together in person, but even if you can't get together, like picking up the phone when that person calls, right? Returning the text quickly, being there, being the sense of availability. I so appreciate Wes. Wes is like this. I feel like I can text Wes, and Wes is super busy. He's a pharmacist. He's got a full family. He's got an extended family in town. He's got a lot going on. He's like going to hunt moose this fall. I mean, there's a lot going on in the world of Wes. But I can text Wes, and I will pretty much always get a response within like a few hours. He's very busy, but he feels very available to me. And I really appreciate that about our friendship. Thanks. Yeah, man. I think Jesus was arguably the most busy person on earth. If you think about it, again, he had 3 years to kind of start this movement that would change the world and never end, right? You just go, that's a lot, that's a big task. He was very, his time was super valuable. And yet you get the impression that Jesus was very present with people. That he was very available for people. When they called out from the side of the road, Son of David, have mercy on it, and he stops. He turns. And Jesus took time for people. So I think that's something we can do is even if we're busy, being available for one another. It doesn't take a lot of time, just takes heart to be available. Additionally, I think we got to make our discipling times a priority, like guard it. Don't just cancel it easily. Sometimes you have a time set up with somebody, and then another person says, hey, let's go get donuts, and you go, okay, get donuts later, right? Like we should prioritize our times with each other. And I think lastly is when we get together, it's important to talk, right? To share our hearts. It's always good to open the scriptures together. It's always good to pray together. But don't limit yourselves to that. Like do stuff together. That's what the apostles did with Jesus, right? They did stuff. They lived life together. And I think about, in my times with Steve, like My discipling times with Steve include things like prayer. They've included studying the Bible with Chris. That was awesome. Like for a while, our times together during the week were just meeting in Chris's garage and we'd study the Bible, next to the space heater. It was awesome. But then there's other times like, we'll pray and things like that. We'll talk over coffee, but, we'll also go try a new Mexican food spot that may or may not be questionable. We'll go biking or hiking, or I'll get dunked on in the pool basketball, It's just like, those are all elements of our relationship. And I love that because I think I grow and I learn a lot from my relationship with Steve, but it's more than just sitting around chatting. And I think sometimes, maybe you've heard this. This is a generalization, okay? It's not for everybody, but women tend to connect more face-to-face. Guys tend to connect more shoulder-to-shoulder. And so but I think it's important for everybody just to do life together. So, Jesus discipled by association. Number 2, he discipled by expectation. Turn over to Luke 9, if you would. We're going to read this here together. Luke chapter 9. It's human nature to act in accordance with what's expected of us. If other people, or even ourselves, expect that we're going to do something well, we tend to rise to the occasion. It's pretty cool. If others or ourselves expect that we're going to fail, we're likely to do so. You may have heard there's a famous study in 1968 by Rosenthal and Jacobson where the researchers gave teachers false information about the IQ levels of their students, basically, just as a study. And they said, they told the teachers, these certain students have tested really high. They have really high IQ. They're on the brink of major growth intellectually. And really, it's totally random. They just made it up. But what happened was the students that the teachers expected to perform well did significantly better, even though it was just all totally random. There was no real IQ advantage or anything like that. It just was simply the expectation of the teacher that they are going to do well. They rose to the occasion. They did very well. And many studies have supported those findings since. I think what we expect of one another makes a huge difference. We need people who believe in us, right? Because we don't always believe in ourselves. And we need people who believe in us. Let's look at how Jesus did this. In Luke 9, in verse 1, it says, when Jesus had called the 12 together, he gave them power and authority to drive out all demons and to cure diseases. And he sent them out to proclaim the kingdom of God and heal the sick. He told them, take nothing for the journey. No staff, no bag, no bread, no money. Just don't take anything. Whatever house you enter, stay there until you leave that town. If people do not welcome you, leave their town and shake the dust off your feet as a testimony against them. So they set out and went from village to village, proclaiming the good news and healing people everywhere. If you jump down to verse 10, it says, when the apostles returned, they reported to Jesus what they had done. Then he took them with him, and they withdrew by themselves, had a little retreat to a town called Bethsaida. So what do we see here? Jesus had great expectations of his guys. Like, he knew they're not going to be perfect. He didn't expect that they were going to be perfect people, but he had high expectations of them. He really believed in them. The apostles, they had seen him do this stuff. They had seen Jesus drive out the demons. They'd seen him preach the kingdom of God. And now they're up to bat. It's their turn to try. And, this is like a high call. I mean, imagine if we did this today. Like if we were like, this week, I want everyone to go out and drive out 5 demons, okay? And I'd like you to heal 5 sick people. Just go to St. Mary's or whatever and just pray over them until they're healed, okay? Heal 5 sick people miraculously. And then go out on the corner and just preach. Just street preach until you have baptized 5 people, okay? And then we're all going to come back and bring the 5 people you baptized, because we're all going to want to meet them, and we'll check in and see how it went, right? You go, you got to be kidding me. Like no one would take that seriously, but that's like high call. Jesus obviously really believed in them. And of course, he gave them authority to do this. And so you could argue that, let's not cloud the issue of facts. But I think the point here is Jesus really believed that with God, these brand new disciples, these guys were fishermen like a few weeks ago, that these greenhorn disciples could really make a difference. Jesus believed in them. He had some great expectations. We also see from this passage that with expectation came a little bit of accountability. You notice that in verse 10, they report to Jesus what they had done. Reporting in was part of their growth, part of their training. And I think in the same way, we need to have some accountability in our relationships. Think about outside of religion. Okay, can you imagine a business with no accountability? We know what happens to institutions like that. There's been a lot of bank collapses lately, if you've read the news, right? Sometimes when there's not accountability, things fall apart. Or you think about, can we imagine a school with no accountability? We don't know what the teachers are teaching. We don't, there's no accountability. You go, that's unacceptable out in the world. Why would it be, a good thing in the church? We need to have some accountability in a healthy way. Now, I was talking to a brother in Denver named Tyler Ting, and he became a Christian my senior year at CU Boulder. He's a really cool story. Actually, he started seeking God because of never mind. I'll tell you the story later. Ask me at the Pollock. But he used to work for a company called Terumo. Terumo makes medical devices that go in hospitals, right? So a lot of the stuff you see in a hospital, companies like Terumo make that stuff. So he used to work, he's a mechanical engineering and bio something, double major, he's brilliant. But I asked him one time, I was like, what's it like working there? What if you're going to design a medical device and it's going to get into the hospital, what does it take to get it approved? And he goes, well, there's 7 major documents that need to be produced. And those 7 major documents are really summaries of hundreds of other documents all of which need to be approved by the 5 heads of the major departments of the company. And so he estimated, it's an estimation, but he said one new medical device probably requires around 3,000 signed documents in order for it to be approved by the FDA. Right? So you have 3,000 times where someone is reviewing someone else's work. That's a lot of accountability. Why so much accountability? Well, because people's lives are potentially on the line. What about when it's not just people's lives, but people's souls? What about when we're talking about eternally significant matters? How much more do we need accountability when it comes to our own souls and the souls of other people? There's an app, I don't know if you've heard of this app called the Lazy Jar. Hopefully you don't have it because it sounds terrible, but it's called the Lazy Jar, and the idea is you put in your goal for like the calories you want to burn or the steps you want to take, and it links up to your Fitbit or your smartwatch or whatever. And basically what happens is when you don't meet your goal, it charges your bank account. And so it's like you're putting money in the Lazy Jar, right? Like literally, and you don't see that money again, like it's gone. And so now there's 2 ways to view that, right? You could go, why would I ever want that? Right? You could go, that's forcing me to work out. I don't want to do that. Or you could view it as, well, that's actually good motivation for me to follow through on what I said I wanted to do. Right? Because you make your own goal and you're asking it to help you. Accountability has become, I think, for some people, a dirty word. But for disciples, I think healthy accountability is simply meant to help us follow through with what we already said we wanted to do when we said Jesus is Lord. Amen. It should never be a means of forcing people to do what they don't want to do. Right? It's not about forcing. It's about just helping us to say, you know what? I want to live for Jesus. Will you help me in that? That's what accountability is about. And I'll be the first to admit, I need accountability, okay? I need accountability in my marriage. I so appreciate when I get together with the guys and they go, how's your marriage doing? I need them to ask me that. I try to be an open book just in my life, but I need people to draw, it's like the proverb says, the heart of a man is deep waters. This person of understanding draws them out. We need to be able to draw each other out. I need that. I need accountability in my parenting. I don't know what the heck I'm doing. I need accountability in that. I need accountability in my purity, in my walk with God, and just deeper areas of my own heart, like how's my, joy? How's my frustration? How's my bitterness, right? I need people to ask me those questions. And I don't think we should have this perspective of like, well, I'm not going to share until someone asks, right? We need to have this spirit of like, I want to be open, I want to be transparent, I want to initiate. But, man, I welcome accountability. Because when I stood at the waters of baptism, when I said Jesus is Lord, I really meant it. And I'm guessing all of us who have made that decision really meant it. But some days are hard, right? I don't always feel like denying myself. I don't always feel like carrying my cross. And I need help. I need support. I need encouragement. And you do too. So let's help each other. Amen? Amen. I think in our relationships, let's believe in each other. All right? Accountability should be something you ask for. It should never be something imposed upon you, right? So I think one of the best things you can do is just sit down with your discipling partner, come up with something that you want to grow in. Where you go, this is my goal. This is something I've come up with. This is my step counter or whatever, come up with your own goals and ask them to hold you accountable, to follow up and talk about it with regularity. I want to challenge all of us. Make one spiritual decision this week and ask for accountability in it, in your discipling relationships. It could be anything. It could be, I want to have consistent time with God. It could be I want to reach out to someone and maybe set up time to have someone over for dinner. It could be I want to take my wife out on a date. It could be finishing that book that bookmark's been halfway through for a year. It could be whatever God puts on your heart. But one decision that you feel great about, and then get some accountability to finish the goal. Sound good? Can we do that one thing this week? All right. Awesome. Accountability is good. It's not a dirty word. Number 3, demonstration. Demonstration. And this is a short one, then we'll close out. One of the qualities I most appreciate about Jesus is he doesn't ask us to do things that he hasn't already done. Right? Jesus is like a good big brother. He goes before us, and he models, and he shows us the way. And I think this is one of the key ways that Jesus discipled and trained his apostles. Jesus let them see his life. They let him see his power and his faith, right? But they also he also let them see like his human weakness, his vulnerability, and his submission to God. In Matthew 26, Garden of Gethsemane, it's a classic one. Let's read this section here together. I'm going to read a little further. I'm going to read through verse 46. I just didn't want to cram it all on the screen there. Matthew 26, starting in verse 36. It says, "Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane. And he said to them, 'Sit here while I go over there and pray.' He took Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, 'My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me.' Going a little further, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, 'My Father, if it's possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will.' Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. 'Couldn't you men keep watch with me for 1 hour?' he asked Peter. 'Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak.' He went away a second time and prayed, 'My Father, if it's not possible for this cup to be taken away, unless I drink it, may your will be done.' When he came back, he again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. So he left them and went away once more and prayed the 3rd time, saying the same thing. Then he returned to the disciples and said to them, 'Are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour has come. The Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer.'" We'll stop there. You know, there's a lot to be seen here. There's a lot we could look at, but I think if you look at verse 37 there, notice what he says. He takes Peter and James and John, those are the sons of Zebedee, along with him. And he begins to be sorrowful and troubled. He lets them see that. And I think he also really needed them. He really needed his friends in this moment. But even in the midst of his need, Jesus, I believe, was teaching them something. Jesus wanted to show them what vulnerability looks like. Right? That true strength is not denying or hiding your feelings, but true strength is expressing to your friends how you're really doing. And I think he wanted to show them submission to the Father, right? That even when every fiber of your being wants something else, that you can still submit and become surrendered to the will of God. And so I believe Jesus discipled by demonstration. What this means for us is a couple things. One, we can learn from the actions and the lifestyle of those who are more spiritually mature than us. We can learn a lot just by observing the lives of spiritually mature people. Two, we can put ourselves in the shoes of the apostles and learn not just by looking at each other, but by looking at Jesus. Right? How did Jesus pray? How did Jesus respond when he was interrupted? I hate being interrupted, but Jesus was interrupted. You can look at, how did he respond to that? How did Jesus, and not right now, you can say stuff, but like, you know, if I'm working and then there's like a baby coming in my room, just hypothetically, like, okay, that bothers me, but I love my son. Okay, whatever. What gave Jesus joy? You know, how did Jesus deal with disappointment? Jesus was disappointed at different times. Are you still so dull? You remember that line, right? How did Jesus deal with disappointment? How did Jesus react to children? How did Jesus react to older people? How did Jesus react to women, to the religious, right? There's so much that we can learn just by looking at the actions and life of Jesus. On a practical level, I think in our times with each other, one of the best things we can ask each other is, do you think Jesus ever went through something that you're going through right now? Right? Like, and not in like a belittling way. Do you think that Jesus, not like really, you know, let's think about it together. Is there something, because almost always in anything you're going through, there's some way that Jesus either went through something similar or had similar, emotions or something like that. There's some way usually that you can find where Jesus can relate to you, right? And so in our times with each other, to ask like, well, what did Jesus do? How did Jesus respond? And even just on a bare bones level, can Jesus relate? Even if there's not necessarily always answers of what did he do or whatever, does he get it? That alone can really help us. I think one of the top questions I think about when I'm getting time with guys and I'm helping disciple the campus brothers or whatever is the top thing I'm thinking of is they're sharing their lives with me and I'm trying to be present, but I'm also thinking like, okay, how did Jesus experience this? Because I don't want to just respond with like my own opinions and here's what I think you should do. I want to go, well, let's look at what Jesus did. Let's look at how Jesus felt in the same way. Some of Jesus' greatest teaching was done in his actions. This is, in the end, what makes the cross so powerful. God doesn't just say, I love you. When Jesus died on the cross, he showed us dramatically, with unfathomable pain and sacrifice. He showed us how unconditional and infinite his love truly is. And so we're going to take communion during our potluck, kind of as a love feast, as a first century love feast meal there. But I want to give us just some thoughts to ponder, and I'd like for us to have some time to discuss and just kind of process what we're talking about here today. Here's some questions to consider, and I'll send these out on the group chat here in a second so you have them, or you can take a picture on your phone, whatever. But number one, let's talk about expectations. What have unhealthy expectations looked like, right? Because I talked about how accountability is good, but it can be bad, right? And it can be done wrong. Expectations can be a negative thing. Have you had experiences with that? Secondly, have you ever had someone who really believes in you? Have you had healthy expectations that really helps you grow? Maybe you had a really great coach or an exemplary parent or something, or a good teacher at school that someone helped you with healthy expectations. What'd that look like? Number two is, what have you learned by observation of positive examples in your life? What did their demonstration teach you? Number three, what are some areas where you'd like to grow in your own walk with God this year? Just when you're thinking about your times with each other, like, what do you want accountability in? Like, what are you going after? What are you trying to grow in? And number four, how does Jesus continue to associate, expect, and demonstrate in your life? In other words, Jesus isn't done doing this. Jesus is continually with us. He's continually believing in us. He's continually showing us, I believe, even though he's not here necessarily in the flesh in the same way, I believe Jesus is continuing to show us by his demonstration. And so think about that, ponder that, and that will be, and obviously if the Spirit puts something else in your mind to talk about in this time, but let's have our conversation over the meal be about this. Let's not just jump straight into the rain that's going to come this week or whatever. Sound good? Although I could talk about that. I could complain about that because I'm upset. But anyway, let's go ahead and say a prayer, and then we'll have one last song, and then we'll go head on over and partake of some food. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Awesome.